Welcome to Worchester Street. I hope you enjoy your stay. In this story, we see what happens when a man living in a small farming community is confronted with horrors that he can neither understand or stop. I covered my mouth and nose with a rag, trying unsuccessfully to block out the smell of decay and death. The dog we'd received a call about lay at my feet, covered in maggots and flies. Its head was submerged in the small river that flowed through town. He looked like he had been dead for 3 or 4 days. "This thing reeks," Jimmy spat on the ground next to me. I put the rag away in defeat. The animals in town had been going crazy all week, attacking each other, running away from home, even turning on their owners. Jimmy and I are the owners of the only animal control place in town, so we had our hands full. This dog was different, though. I couldn't see any reason how it got here. "How'd you reckon it died?" Jimmy said, staring at the carcass in disgust. I pulled out my notepad and wrote down the time and place for our records. "I don't know. Drowning, maybe." Jimmy raised an eyebrow at me. "Drowning? In 6 inches of water? How'd that happen?" I shook my head. "I don't know. All I know is that with everything that's happened in the last few days, it wouldn't surprise me." Jimmy nodded thoughtfully, concern plain on his face. "Don't I know it? Just this morning, my neighbor was nearly trampled to death by his horse. Never had any problems like it before." I had heard plenty of those stories myself. I looked towards the road where our van was parked. The last light of the setting sun was hazy through the thick fog that had rolled into town a few days back. "Well, let's get some gloves and see if we can't get this thing into some trash bags before dark." After a few minutes of working, we were able to get most of what was left of the dog into some thick plastic bags. I sat down in the passenger seat of the van as Jimmy threw the bag in the back. He came around and sat down heavily in the driver's seat. After a second, he cleared his throat. "Listen, Frank, why don't you head home for the day? It's getting pretty late. Go spend some time with Brendan and Elena. They'd like that. I can take care of this dog." I looked at him sharply. "I keep on telling you, Jim, I'm fine. Working helps keep my mind off it." Jimmy threw his hands up in frustration. "Well, that might be your problem then. It's been 3 months since the accident. Don't you think I cut him off. "Don't you bring her up, Jimmy. I told you never to talk about her." Jimmy's voice grew hard. "So now I'm never allowed to talk about my sister, is that it? Just because you can't handle it?" He shook his head. His next words came out softer. "I know it's hard, Frank. No one should lose a spouse like you did. It's not right. But your kids need you. Go on home." I ground my teeth in frustration. "Fine. If you want to get rid of this dog yourself, be my guest." Jimmy gave a wry smile. "I guess I just didn't want to share the smell. Here, I'll drop you off at your place." He put the van into gear and started off towards my house. We drove for a few minutes in silence, wheat fields whizzing by on either side. The sun had finally set over the horizon. Soon, the streetlights of Main Street glared through the fog in the distance. Taylorsville was a tight-knit town, mostly farmers and ranchers, quiet folk working to make an honest living. When the middle of Main Street finally got a traffic light installed, it was the talk of the town for about a month. We passed by the only drugstore, corner store, and gas station for about 20 miles as we made our way through town. As we left Main Street behind, I pulled out a lighter and lit a cigarette. Jimmy turned to me. "You know, Frank, I think we—" He cut off suddenly. His eyes were staring up ahead. What is that?" He pointed to a grassy field with some cows lying down in it. I blew out smoke and peered through the window at the cows sitting in the fog. "I don't know, Jimmy. You know my vision isn't what it used to be." Jimmy's entire body was tense as a wound guitar string. He parked the van. His hands were shaking. I looked at him in surprise. "Well, what is it?" He shook his head, not speaking, and not taking his eyes off the cows. I opened my door and circled around the front of the car. He hissed at me. "Frank, you get back in this car right now." I gave him a look and walked towards the field. I stopped mid-step. The cows were not lying down. The cows were dead. Each cow was covered in deep cuts, crisscrossing all over their hides. Every hair on my body stood up. The cow bodies were arranged in a circle with a single cow in the middle, completely dismembered. My cigarette fell from my numb fingers as I heard the sound of the van starting. I turned and ran back to it, jumping into my seat just as Jimmy took off. I sputtered until I found my voice. What the... Who... What... How does that happen? What could have done that? Jimmy just shook his head. I don't know, Frank. I've never seen anything like that before. They weren't even eaten, just all cut up. I saw the lone street light that marked the end of my driveway. Jimmy took the turn, going 40 miles an hour. My house was a simple one-story farmhouse, same as most houses in the area. Jimmy drove the 150 feet or so to my house, gravel crunching under the tires. I jumped out and ran to my front door. I burst through the door, Jimmy hot on my heels. I slammed the door shut behind us and locked it. I took a look at the inside of my house. The sound of the TV echoed through the hall. Brendan, Elena, y'all home? Elena walked from the kitchen with tears streaking her face. Dad, Angel ran away. I can't find her anywhere. I ran up to her. It's okay, baby girl. Where's your older brother? She sniffled. He's in his room playing with his toys. Okay, great. Stay here with your uncle, okay? We'll find Angel, I promise. She's a smart dog. She nodded. I turned and ran down the hallway to my 8-year-old son's room. He was under his bed, curled up in a ball. Brendan, you okay, buddy? He looked at me with fear in his eyes. There's something outside my window, he whispered. I put my finger on the blinds and swallowed. Then I moved my eyes next to my finger and pulled down. I saw the road we had just driven down. Then I swore under my breath. The streetlight that marked the end of my driveway was fuzzy and hazy in the thick fog. Underneath it stood a creature. It had 2 legs and was at least 9 feet tall. Its long arms almost seemed to touch the ground. Even with my poor eyesight, I could see the foot-long claws that extended diagonally from its arms. It had yellow eyes that were staring, unblinking at the house. It didn't move, but I knew somehow that it saw me, more clearly than I saw it. I recoiled from the window as if I'd been hit. I reached down and pulled Brendan out from under the bed and ran with him in my arms into the living room. I set him down on the couch and ran to the coat closet and pulled out my shotgun. I began to fumble with a box of shells. The flickering light from the TV lit up the otherwise dark room. Jimmy looked up from Elena in surprise. What is it, Frank? There are monsters out there, Brendan said quietly. I dropped a shell that skittered across the floor. I went after it as I realized what my son had said. Monsters? You saw more than one of those things, Brendan? Jimmy looked back and forth between us. More than one what? I grabbed Brendan, shaking him. Did you see more than one? He began to cry. I saw them walking from the road towards the house. Suddenly the TV cut to black. Then it hissed and beeped, and a voice rang out. Stay tuned for important information. It returned to beeping and repeated the message. The screen went black, then displayed a new message in text across the screen. Important announcement from the Department of Defense to all citizens. An event of unknown origin has begun in your area. In order to ensure your safety, you must perform the following actions. Any deviation will result in loss of life. 1. Open all external and internal doors. 2. Open all windows. 3. Do not attempt by any means to bar entry. 4. When they enter, do not move or acknowledge their presence in any way. 5. Do not react. 6. Small children, otherwise impaired individuals, and pets you cannot keep from reacting and should be abandoned. 7. Repeat. Do not react. Leave your televisions or radios on to await the all clear. Good luck. Jimmy stared numbly at the TV, now repeating the message. What? I saw shadows moving through the curtains on the windows at the back of the house. My hands trembled as I held the gun. Jimmy saw the shadows. Blood drained from his face. Frank, you tell me what you saw right now. I heard a scuffling sound from the front of the house. The stairs leading up to my house creaked, and the handle on my front door began to move. I hope you all enjoyed this story. If you've watched up to this point, please leave a like and comment below what you thought. My goal is to support myself through my writing, so if you have the means and the desire, please support me on Patreon, linked in the description. Another huge shout out to Melissa Priolo, a Patreon supporter. Also, a shout out to Danny Landuff for inspiring me with his short scary story post about a public service announcement. You can find the link to one of his posts in the description. Thank you for watching, and as always, I hope you've enjoyed your time on Worchester Street.